Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Gem Knight Yu-Gi-Oh deck profile for August 2023. I wanted to do an update to the Gem Knight deck. It's one of my favorite decks from the Hidden Arsenal Dual Terminal storyline, and we also got Fusion Armament in the latest Yu-Gi-Oh booster set, Duelist Nexus, adding to some playstyle setup that we can do along with some of the newer Gem Knight support we got from a year ago. I can't believe it's been a year since the last update to the Gem Knight deck, but the added Fusion playstyle and the potential that maybe we'll see something off the ban list for Gem Knights. We do have a list coming up. If the list does come out by the time this video is released, and sadly we didn't see, Gem Knight, Master Diamond, or Brilliant Fusion numbers adjusted because of the potential FTK power that this deck does have, we'll go with the added changes I've made to the deck. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For the Gem Knight monsters, we're running 3 copies of Gem Knight Lapis, one of our go-to normal monsters because it's needed for the required fusion summon of our Lady Lapis Lazuli, and also being an excellent target for our new spell in the deck, which is Fusion Armament. You can summon this card out and then also have your needed fusion material for your Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli, needing Lapis and then one other Gem Knight monster to make it. For the other normal monsters, we also run the 3 copies of Gem Knight Garnet and the 2 copies of Gem Knight Tourmaline. So you have these added numbers in the deck. You could potentially take out the Tourmaline because with the Prism Aura summon, you could always summon this off of Lady Brilliant Diamond. This is just another target for our unexpected die in the deck, and also being able to summon out with Rescue Rabbit. You could go with just the Lapis and the Garnets. If you were to do so, you could drop the Tourmalines for additional numbers of Fusion Armament in the main deck. Totally player preference with that choice in the deck. But for the effect monsters, for the Gem Knights, I'm also running the 3 copies of Gem Knight Quartz. If your opponent controls a monster, you can discard this card to set 1 fusion continuous spell directly from your deck. Also, you cannot special summon from the X deck for the rest of the turn, except for Gem Knight monsters. And if this card is used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the graveyard or banished, you can add 1 Gem Knight monster from your graveyard to your hand, except for Gem Knight Quartz. You can only use the effect of Quartz once per turn, but this card can set up our Scatter Fusion onto the field. It could also set Brilliant Fusion if it wasn't on the ban list. Like I said, I may potentially be updating this list when we get some maybe changes. I don't see it happening. Brilliant Fusion is just a really good engine card for a lot of decks, but a guy can dream for that play. And also the 3 copies of Gem Knight Lazuli. You have more recycle power thanks to Lazuli. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can target a normal monster in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. So with the recycle power of plenty of our Gem Knight normal monsters thanks to this card, Lazuli can even be sent off of cards like Lady Lapis Lazuli and then given the recycle power thanks to that effect. And also the 3 copies of Gem Knight Obsidian. If this card is sent from the hand to your graveyard, you can target 1 level 4 or lower normal monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. So if you use Obsidian for a fusion play, you'll get the special summon of the additional normal monster you may have had in your hand used for that fusion play, or if there was a normal monster in your graveyard already to begin with, you'll get that special summon onto the field, which is very useful if you were to use cards like your Lady Brilliant Diamond for the fusion play to at least have another Gem Knight target to tribute off of Lady Brilliant Diamond to then summon onto the field. For some of the other non-Gem Knight cards, I run 3 Gem Armadillo. While not a Gem Knight itself, it is a search card for our Gem Knight monsters. So you can add any of the Gem Knight monsters I mentioned before when this card is normal summoned. And you can also use Gem Armadillo to summon out our Gem Knight Phantom Quartz, since you just need 2 Gem monsters to make this Link monster. So it can also be used for fusion plays to summon out cards like Gem Knight Zirconia, but it's mostly in here for the search power. And then, like I said, if you get another Gem Knight on the field, you can use it for the Link play. I also run the 1 copy of Brilliant Rose and the 1 copy of Crystal Rose. You have the name copy effects of Crystal Rose, and then with Brilliant Rose, it's always treated as a Gem Knight card. You can discard 1 Gem Knight or Melodious card to special summon this card from your hand. You go and use this effect of Brilliant Rose once per turn, and once per turn from your hand. You can send 1 Gem Knight or Melodious monster from your X deck to the graveyard until the end of this turn. This card's name and type and attribute become the same as that original monster. So with this card, it's always treated as a Gem Knight card, so you can add it off of your Gem Armadillo, and then then being able to discard another Gem Knight card to special summon this card from your hand onto the field, giving you the added other monster for you to then go into your Link 2 play. And then I also run the 3 Rescue Rabbit for more special summon power for our normal monsters. Summoning them both onto the field can also give us our Phantom Quartz play, or giving us 2 Gem Knight monsters for the fusion summon we may try to go into, with the last of the main deck monsters being 2 copies of Nibiru, the Primal Being. I only run 2 copies of this card because it is searchable, with our only Xyz monster that we run in the deck being our Gallant Granite, needing 2 level 4 monsters, and then just being able to either special summon a rock monster from our hand in face down defense position, or to have a search of a rock monster from our deck to our hand. So on top of Nibiru, our Gallant Granite can also search other rock monsters that we run in the deck. So if we need some for, let's say, the fusion plays, and we already have the Nibiru in our hand, it's just a good hand trap to search out for, and then make our opponent play around during their turn. For the spell cards, I run 3 copies of Gem Knight Fusion. This card is super good for its recycle power, just being able to banish a Gem Knight monster from our graveyard to add it back to our hand. So even if your opponent negates this spell, and you can then have the monster in your graveyard needed for adding it back to your hand, you can then just reactivate it again, because you do not have to, send your fusion monsters. It's not a cost to send fusion material. So if they negate this card, you still have your monsters, whether they be in your hand or on your field, to use. And I'm also running 2 of the Scatter Fusion. Like I said, this card is released in Power of the Elements. During your main phase, if your opponent controls a monster, you can fusion summon 1 non-rock Gem Knight monster from your extra deck using monsters from your deck as material. So it has to be a non-rock Gem Knight, so remember that as well. Sadly, when it comes to fusion summoning with this card, but you can summon out our Gem Knight Lady Rose Diamond with this card on the field. That's why we're also running 2 of this card. It is searchable off of our Gem Knight Quartz, and with it you have that search and setup for this card. Also, you're restricted for the special summoning except for Gem Knight monsters. You can only use this effect of Scatter Fusion once per turn, and when it leaves the field, destroy all monsters fusion summoned by this card effect. It can remain on the field and be used for that fusion play if your opponent controls a monster. That's the only restriction, so it's not a great first turn setup. Once again, why we're only running the 2 in the deck. For the rest of the spells, I run the 1 copy of Call by the Grave, the 1 copy of Monster Reborn, and the 1 copy of Fusion Armament. Fusion Armament, you reveal a fusion monster in your extra deck and special summon one of the fusion materials whose name is mentioned on that card from your extra deck or graveyard, but until the end of your opponent's turn, it cannot attack, and if its effects, if it has any, are negated. You can activate 1 Fusion Armament per turn, but you have the search power to special summon from your graveyard more of the materials. That's why it's more of a one of in the deck. It doesn't special summon from the deck like Unexpected Die, but you still have search power for that monster mentioned from it from the graveyard back onto the field to give you an additional research if you have it for that play. And the main play will come in the form of Lapis, which we can then also special summon thanks to other cards like our Unexpected Die, which we run 3 copies of for this, just being able to, if you control no monsters, special summon 1 of the level 4 lower normal monsters from your deck. So then if you open up Unexpected Die and Fusion Armament, you can then have the use of Fusion Armament to then special summon back the other resource back onto the field, and then make use of it thanks to that play, as long as you have the added monsters. But we're running multiple copies of Lady Lapis Lazuli, so even if we fusion summon out that card, we still have the target to reveal thanks to this card. With the last of these spells being the 2 copies of Pot of Prosperity. Now, there are some plays that you just need a specific card to fully make the combo, whether it be your Gem Knight Fusion or a specific monster. Pot of Prosperity definitely does help with that. And also with this card, you cannot draw cards by effects, but you're really not limited to that play because there's really no draw in the deck to begin with, and you'll have plenty of banished targets off of this card depending on if you want to go for the 3 or 6 reveal off the top of your deck. If you don't have Pot of Prosperity, I know this card is going to be reprinted soon, which is why I'm adding into the deck. It's going to be hopefully more readily available with the staple set coming out, and potentially the addition to the Pot collection, which we'll be getting as well. But other than that, we'll now move on to the extra deck. I'm running 2 copies of Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli. It must first be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials. You can only special summon Lady Lapis Lazuli once per turn, and once per turn you can send 1 Gem Knight monster from your main deck or extra deck to the graveyard to inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each special summon monster on the field. So if your opponent has a board of special summon monsters, that's more burn damage they'll be taking, but you could potentially, if you have a full field of special summon monsters, hit your opponent for 3,000 points of burn damage thanks to this card. and then depending on the monsters you send, you could also get recycle power back to your hand if you send Lazuli, being able to add back a normal monster off the sended card with your Lady Lapis Lazuli to begin with. Now, I do want to run 2 copies of Lady Brilliant Diamond. This card just adds more search power, needing 3 Gem Knight monsters to summon it out. And also with this card, you can just tribute or send another face-up Gem Knight monster you control to the graveyard to special summon 1 Gem Knight fusion from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. You can use Lady Brilliant Diamond to summon out any of your other Gem Knight monsters, including Lady Lapis Lazuli, just off of another Gem Knight monster you had on the field. I have a copy of Lady Lapis Lazuli to substitute in for her, but because you could just run 2 Lady Lapis Lazuli and then the 2 copies of Lady Brilliant Diamond, definitely. And then also the 2 copies of Gem Knight Lady Rose Diamond. I'm also running 2 of all these cards, so you have potential banished targets to go with for Pot of Prosperity. With Gem Knight Lady Rose Diamond, this is also the fairy monster you want to summon off of your Scatter Fusion, since you have to summon a non-rock Gem Knight monster once per turn. Your opponent's turn, the first time a Gem Knight monster you control will be destroyed by a card effect. It is not. And during your turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can banish 1 Gem Knight card from your graveyard to target 1 face-up card your opponent controls and destroy it. So this is a great setup card with Scatter Fusion to then have it so during your turn when your opponent activates a monster effect, if they try to interrupt any of your Gem Knight plays, you have Lady Rose Diamond to rely on to destroy your opponent's cards thanks to that play that they may try to avoid then. And then also for the one-ofs for the Gem Knight fusions, 1 copy of Master Diamond. This card can copy the effects of your Gem Knight monsters in the graveyard. So if you have your Lady Lapis Lazuli in the graveyard, you can banish it and then gain the additional effects off of Master Diamond. This card's currently at 1. That's why we're only running 1. And then the 1 Seraphite for the additional normal summon plays. You can normal summon additional Gem Armadillos with this card. The 1 Zirconia as another rock target to use. You can even, if you have to, if you're playing against a deck that your opponent has, that they don't summon out a lot of monsters and you have the Nibiru in your hand, use that as the fusion material for Zirconia. And then lastly, for the fusions, the 1 copy of Prismora. We are running the Tourmaline, which is a Thunder monster, to be able to make this card. But you can also just send another Gem Knight with Lady Brilliant Diamond to summon this card out without the means of properly fusion summoning it. And then for the Link monsters, we run the 2 copies of the Gem Knight Phantom Quartz. If this card is Link summoned, you can add 1 Gem Knight card from your deck to your hand, and you can pay 1,000 life points to fusion summon 1 Gem Knight fusion monster from your extra deck by shuffling fusion materials from that card listed on it from the deck that are banished or in the graveyard, but it cannot attack directly this turn. You only use each effect of Phantom Quartz once per turn, but its search power, just being able to add a Gem Knight card, you can add the spell card or any monsters you may need off of this card, and then just having an additional fusion on top of it, thanks to it also being needed 2 gem monsters to make it. You can also use the Gem Armadillo, as I mentioned before, and then also the 1 copy of Link Spider, so you have a way to use your normal monsters, and then also use those monsters to then go into Cross Sheep with the fusion play for Cross Sheep being able to special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard to give you more resources back for your Gem Knight plays. And then lastly, the 1 copy of Gallant Granite for the Rock Search. If you just have the Rescue Rabbit and let's say no fusion plays, you can at least use the Gallant Granite with the 2 level 4 monsters you summon out to then overlay into and then get the additional Rock Search that you may need off of this card, whether it be Nibiru to then wait an additional turn for your opponent to go into, or the added search power. You also have the Link 2 play, so if you have the needed search, you can then go into the overlay of your monster needed for that summon and then get your search from there. For some of the go-to plays in the deck, you have the search power, all thanks to your Gem Knight cards, but it comes down to what you open up in your hand as well. If you have the Gem Knight Fusion and then also the additional summon, let's go off of the first play I mentioned before with the Gem Armadillo. So you summon out your Gem Armadillo to add a Gem Knight monster from your deck to your hand. So then you have your search for your Brilliant Rose. It's always treated as a Gem Knight card, so you can search it off of Gem Armadillo, and then you can discard a Gem Knight card to special summon this card from your hand. So then you can even send off of this card the Gem Knight Fusion or another Gem Knight monster in your hand. So sending it off to the graveyard, let's just say we send the Gem Knight Fusion to then special summon out the Brilliant Rose off of this play. And then also once per turn, you can send 1 Gem Knight or Melodious monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, and then this card's name and type and attribute become the same as has that monster as well. So with this card, you can send to the graveyard your Gem Knight Lady Rose Diamond, if you wish, for the play. And then you have the Gem Knight in your graveyard for you then to add back for the banish off of Gem Knight Fusion. So you can banish this card, adding Gem Knight Fusion back to your hand since it was the card you sent off of Brilliant Rose. You have the name counted for it. So you can use these two cards for the link summon of your Gem Knight Phantom Quartz. And then with Gem Knight Phantom Quartz, you can add the needed monster from your deck to your hand. You already have the Gem Knight Fusion in your hand. So with this card, you can add Lapis to your hand. And then from there, you can go for the additional fusion play of your Gem Knight Phantom Quartz by shuffling materials in your possession listed on your deck or that are banished in your graveyard but cannot attack directly this turn. So you have the Lapis and the fusion in your hand. You can then use the Rose Diamond that is banished and the Gem Armadillo in your graveyard to shuffle these cards back with the paid life points needed, having the Gem Knight Monster and the Rock Monster to then summon out your Gem Knight Zirconia. And then from there, you have the additional fusion search, so you can activate your Gem Knight Fusion summoning out your Zirconia and your Lady Lapis Lazuli for the added play to then summon out your Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli. You can then go for the additional search, so you have the fusion in the graveyard. You could banish to add the Gem Knight Fusion back to your hand, but first you can activate your Lady Lapis Lazuli using its effect to send a Gem Knight Lazuli to the graveyard, activating the burn damage. So you currently have 2 special summon on the field for 1,000 points of damage. You can then activate the Lazuli in the graveyard to add back the Lapis to your hand as well. And then from there, you can activate the Gem Knight Fusion for the added search power of the 3 monsters on the field to then go into Lady Brilliant Diamond. But this was all done with just the 1 Gem Armadillo in your hand and then the 1 send off of the Lady Brilliant Rose as well for that play. If you have more of the added options in your hand, like the best play I would say would be having the 1 Gem Knight Fusion and then just the additional 4 of Gem Knight monsters, regardless of what they are. Even if you have a card like Rescue Rabbit, it makes it all the better for your search and setup. So with this, you can go for your normal summon of your Rescue Rabbit, banishing it to then special summon out your 2 Gem Knight monsters, depending on what they may be. Then you can use those 2 monsters, you have these 4 still in your hand, to then go for a link to play, so the banished Rescue Rabbit and then the 2 Gem Knight monsters, to then summon out the same play I mentioned before, being the Phantom Quartz. You can then activate Phantom Quartz to add the needed Gem Knight monster. Let's say you don't have the Obsidian in your hand, you will then want to add the Obsidian off of this card. So then with this play, you will activate your Gem Knight Fusion, and then using the Lazuli, the Lapis, and the Obsidian in your hand to then go into the Lady Brilliant Diamond, keeping your arrows free if you wish. Then you will activate, this will be in your graveyard, the Obsidian and the Lazuli, so you can special summon one of the Gem Knights back onto the field and then add the other one back to your hand. You can use the Gem Knight Fusion to banish the Obsidian to add this card back to your hand, and then you can use your Gem Knight Fusion to fuse the Lapis and the Tourmaline together to then fusion summon out your Lady Lapis Lazuli, having 3 monsters on the field. You can then activate your Gem Knight Phantom Quartz to then shuffle back the Obsidian and then one of the other Tourmaline in the graveyard back into the deck to summon out your other Gem Knight monster for the play. So then you can summon out your Gem Knight Zirconia onto the field, having that added monster. And then from there, you can also add back the Gem Knight Fusion by banishing another Gem Knight to your hand for that play. And then you also have the additional fusion play if you want to have with the additional Lazuli in your banish and then the Gem Knight Garnet in your hand. You can either go for an additional fusion play. You can use the Lady Lapis Lazuli to send the monster needed. So you can send from your deck to the graveyard another Lazuli, burning your opponent for 2,000 points of damage using the Lazuli to add another normal monster back to your hand. Then you can use Gem Knight Fusion to fuse the 2 together into another needed monster. If you have the Tourmaline, you can add your Prismor off this effect. Then you can use your Lady Brilliant Diamond, tributing your Lapis Lazuli to summon out your Gem Knight Master Diamond onto the field, and then use Master Diamond to banish your Lady Lapis Lazuli for an additional burn. So on top of the 2,000, that's another 2,500 for both of these cards, having a full monster board on the field to begin with, and already burning your opponent for 4,500 points of damage before the first turn is even gone. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, I always love updating the Gem Knight deck. It's one of my favorite dual terminal storyline decks to keep up to date with. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And Kira, Twig out.